What would you do if the person who destroyed your life ended up on your operating table? Not a stranger. Not an enemy you'd never met. Your own flesh and blood. The one who smiled at your face and burned everything down behind your back. My name is Dr. Samantha Diaz. I'm 34 years old. And 5 years ago, my brother told our parents I had been fired from my nursing program for stealing medication. He fabricated the entire story. He forged screenshots. He rehearsed the lie until it sounded like grief. And our parents believed him without asking me a single question. They cut me off, changed the locks on the family home, didn't come to my medical school graduation, weren't at my wedding. For 5 years, I was nobody's daughter. I was nobody's sister. I was a ghost living inside a life that the people who made me had decided no longer existed. Then one night, my brother was brought into my emergency department. Unconscious, bleeding, dying. And the name on the white coat standing over his stretcher was mine. Before we get into this, take a moment to subscribe if this story speaks to something you've been carrying. Drop your location and the time where you are right now in the comments. I want to know who's out there, who's listening, because I have a feeling some of you already know exactly how this story feels. Now let me take you back, all the way back to a Tuesday evening in Tucson, Arizona. The night my father looked at me across the dinner table like I had finally, after all these years, made him proud. I had no idea it would be the last time. Growing up in the Ortiz house in South Tucson meant two things. You worked hard, and you did not embarrass the family. My parents, Ronaldo and Cecilia Ortiz, had come from nothing and built something modest and honest. Dad drove long-haul freight routes. Mom worked the front desk at a dental clinic for 22 years. They were not wealthy people, but they were proud people. And pride in that house was the currency that mattered most. There were 2 children in the Ortiz home. My brother Callum, 4 years older than me, and me, Samantha. The youngest. The quiet one. The one who spent Friday nights studying while Callum threw house parties that my parents somehow found charming. Callum had a talent I never could replicate. He could make any room love him inside of 10 minutes. He was loud and warm and funny in the way that made adults lean in. Dad called him a natural. Mom used to say God broke the mold after Callum was born, and she would laugh when she said it, but she wasn't entirely joking. I was not that kind of person. I was the kind of person who read medical textbooks on summer vacation, who asked the science teacher follow-up questions after class, who kept a notebook of every biology concept I didn't yet understand, so I could go home and understand it by morning. I was not difficult. I was not sullen. I was simply the kind of person who exists at a different frequency than the room around them. And in the Ortiz house, that frequency was easy to overlook. Here is one small example, and I want you to sit with it because it captures everything. I was 15. I had won a regional science competition, a project on antibiotic resistance in low-income communities that had taken me 4 months. It was the first time a student from my school had placed in the top 3 at that level. The same weekend, Callum's band played a 20-minute set at a local street festival. One guess where my parents were. I took the bus home with my ribbon and my certificate and set them on the kitchen counter. Dad came home that evening, looked at them, and said, "That's real good, Mija." Then he went to the living room to watch the game. He never asked what the project was about. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you this because what came later makes no sense unless you understand what came before. The architecture of a betrayal is always built on an existing foundation. Callum didn't invent my invisibility. He just weaponized it. The day I received my acceptance letter to the University of Arizona College of Medicine, something shifted in that house. Mom printed the letter and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a cactus she'd had since 1997. Dad came home from a long haul, dusty and tired, read it standing in the kitchen, and then did something I'd waited my entire life for. He pulled me into a hug. Real, solid, deliberate. He said, "You're going to do something real with your life, Samantha." That was it. That was the whole sentence. But I held on to it like a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Callum was visiting that weekend. He was 26, managing a sporting goods store in Phoenix, living a comfortable, unremarkable life. Fine job. Nothing wrong with it. But standing next to a medical school acceptance letter at a dinner table, fine stops looking like enough. I caught him watching me that night while Mom called her sisters, while Dad retold the story to the neighbor who came to borrow a ladder and got a 20-minute celebration instead. Callum was smiling. He always smiled. But his eyes were doing something separate from his mouth. I know that now. At the time, I thought he was tired from the drive. I should have paid closer attention. The first year of medical school was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Not because I wasn't capable, but because capable and prepared are two different things, and nothing prepares you for the specific, grinding, disorienting exhaustion of becoming a doctor. The studying was relentless. The self-doubt was louder than I expected. And Tucson felt very far away. I made one real friend that first semester. Her name was Amina Floyd. She was sharp, funny, and completely allergic to self-pity in a way that made her the best possible person to be around when everything felt impossible. She had grown up in Albuquerque, the daughter of a high school principal and a retired Army logistics officer. She was the first person in her family to go to medical school, same as me, and that shared weight created a bond faster than anything else could have. Amina was the one who sat with me in the library at 2 a.m. when I failed my first pharmacology exam and felt the walls closing in. She was the one who said, "You didn't come this far to fold over one test, Sam." And she was the one who, when I called home during a brutal exam week and Mom said, "I can't talk right now. Callum needs me to help him find a new apartment," just sat quietly with me afterward and said nothing until I was ready to stand back up. She was also, without knowing it, the person whose existence would give Callum the opening he needed. Callum had started calling me more that year. 2-3 times a week. It felt like my brother was finally seeing me. Like the distance had somehow unlocked a closeness we'd never had in person. He asked questions. About my professors, my classes, the hospital rotations, my schedule. He remembered names I mentioned in passing. He seemed genuinely interested. I told him everything. Every small crisis and quiet victory. Every name, every detail, every moment of vulnerability wrapped in a grateful smile. I was handing him a blueprint. Second year of medical school, I met Gail Floyd, Amina's older brother. He had come down to Tucson to help Amina move apartments. He was a high school history teacher. Patient, steady, the kind of person who listens to the whole sentence before he responds. We talked for 4 hours on the steps outside Amina's new apartment while she ordered pizza and pretended she hadn't planned the introduction. We dated for a year. We were careful and honest and genuinely good together. I told Callum about him the same way I told him everything else. His name, his job, his family. I even mentioned once in passing that Gail had gone through a rough stretch 2 years before we met. A difficult breakup that sent him spiraling briefly. He'd gotten help. He'd come through it. It was ancient history, something he had fully dealt with and moved past. Callum asked 3 follow-up questions about that particular detail. I noticed. I told myself I was imagining things. 3rd year of medical school. I was rotating through internal medicine when Amina's father had a massive stroke. He survived, but barely. He spent 3 weeks in the ICU and came out needing full-time rehabilitation. Amina was his only family member in the state. Her mother had passed 2 years earlier. Her brother Gail was 3 hours away and had his own teaching responsibilities. I went to the dean's office and explained the situation. He was a measured, fair man named Dr. Calder, who believed in the full humanity of his students. He approved a formal leave of absence. 1 semester. Caregiver designation. My position in the program was held. Everything was documented. I would return in January. It was all legitimate. All on paper. I called Callum because I still believed we were building something real between us. I told him about Amina's father, about the leave, about the plan. I told him I'd be helping coordinate his care and managing the household while Amina managed the medical decisions. Callum's voice was everything I needed to hear. That's exactly the right thing to do, Sam. Don't worry about a thing. I won't say anything to Mom and Dad that would make them nervous. For days later, he called our parents. I don't know the exact words he used that night. I wouldn't learn the full scope of what he said until years later, when the whole architecture collapsed in the most public, most ironic way imaginable. But the damage was immediate. The call came at 10:30 at night. I was in the kitchen of Amina's father's house, making a list of medications and their timing so the night aide could manage without confusion. My phone lit up. Dad's name. Your brother told us what's been going on. His voice was flat. The kind of flat that isn't calm. The kind that means everything underneath has been decided. Dad, whatever he told you. He showed us the messages, Samantha. He showed us proof. He talked to people at the school. I pressed my hand to the counter to keep myself upright. What messages? What proof? Don't do that. Don't play innocent. The drinking, Samantha. The situation with Gail. His background. The fact that you've been hiding all of it. A pause. Your brother wouldn't make this up. Dad, I am standing in a sick man's kitchen managing his medication schedule because his daughter is my best friend and she needs help. That is what I am doing right now. I can give you the dean's number. I can send you the official paperwork. Monica said you'd have a story ready. He caught himself. He'd said Monica. He meant to say Callum. A small fracture in the wall. Too small at that moment to matter. Don't call this house until you're ready to tell the truth, he said. You've embarrassed us enough. The line went dead. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. The medication list was still in my hand. The refrigerator hummed. Through the window, the Tucson streetlights lit up the empty road. 20 minutes later, a text from Callum. I'm sorry, Sam. I couldn't keep covering for you anymore. Mom and Dad deserved to know. He wasn't sorry. He was satisfied. And he had ended the message with a broken heart emoji like the whole thing had cost him something. I need you to know that I tried. Every reasonable thing a person can try from 600 miles away with no money and a borrowed sense of stability. In the 5 days that followed, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 went to voicemail. By the 4th attempt, Dad's number had been blocked. Mom blocked me 2 days after that. I sent 2 emails. The first was short and direct, just the facts. The second was long and thorough. I attached the signed leave of absence documentation. I included Dean Calder's direct phone number. I included the name and contact information of the social worker managing Amina's father's care, who could confirm every detail of why I was there. Neither email received a response. I wrote a handwritten letter. I mailed it priority. 5 days later, it came back. Returned to sender. Unopened. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. I called my Aunt Priya, Dad's younger sister, and the only person in our extended family who had always treated me like a full person. Priya called my father that same evening. I know because she called me back 40 minutes later, voice low and careful. He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart. He said you made your choices. She had tried to tell him about the leave of absence. He told her she was being manipulated. 5 days. 14 calls. 2 emails. 1 letter. 1 intermediary. Every single channel blocked, returned, or ignored. And here is the thing that I want you to sit with, because this is the part that took me years to fully understand. This wasn't just a response to Callum's lie. This was the pattern of my entire life arriving at its final, loudest form. Every science fair they missed. Every achievement that got a brief nod and no follow-up question. Every time Callum's version of a story was accepted without examination, while mine required proof. This was just the ultimate, most devastating iteration. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I gave up. Because I understood that they had already made their choice a long time before Callum ever picked up the phone. He just gave them permission to stop pretending otherwise. I finished the leave of absence. Amina's father stabilized over 4 months. He never fully recovered his speech, but he regained enough mobility to move into a supported living facility with good staff and a garden he could sit in. Amina and I stood outside that facility on a gray January afternoon, and she held my hand and said, I don't know how to thank you for this. I told her she didn't need to. That's what people do for each other. I went back to medical school in January, the way I had always planned. No safety net. No family support. I applied for additional loans. I picked up a research assistant position that paid almost nothing, but kept my mind occupied in the hours when the silence from Tucson threatened to become unbearable. Medical school doesn't care about your personal life. Biochemistry exams don't pause because your family has decided you no longer exist. Overnight hospital rotations don't get shorter because you cried in the stairwell at 1 a.m. So I stopped crying and I started working. I work the way you work when you have something to prove, not to anyone else, but to the version of yourself that is still alive somewhere underneath all the grief. There is a note I kept from that period. I had written it to myself one night on a hospital notepad during a long shift when the exhaustion was total and the loneliness felt like a physical weight. You didn't come here for them. You came here for the patients who are waiting for a doctor who will not give up on them. Become that doctor. The rest will have to figure itself out. I read that note a lot in the years that followed. I graduated on time. Amina was in the front row, along with Gail, who had driven 3 hours and brought flowers that were slightly too large for the venue. Nobody from Tucson came. I matched into a surgical residency at Crestfield Medical Center, a level 1 trauma center in Denver, Colorado. Fast, complex, high stakes. exactly where I needed to be. Crestfield Medical Center in Denver was exactly the kind of place that forgets to be gentle with you. It was fast and loud and relentless in the best possible way. Trauma surgery doesn't give you space to feel sorry for yourself. The moment you walk through those doors, the only thing that matters is the patient in front of you. Everything else, the grief, the silence, the unopened letters, gets folded down small and put somewhere that can't interfere with your hands. That's not avoidance. That's survival. And sometimes survival is the most intelligent thing a person can do. My attending during second year of residency was a woman named Dr. Celestine Marchetti. 61 years old, silver hair cut short, the kind of surgeon who could walk into a trauma bay and lower the temperature of the room by simply being the most competent person in it. She had trained at Johns Hopkins, spent a decade in field surgery with an international medical organization, and had come to Crestfield at 52, as she put it, stop moving around and start building something that lasts. She took one look at my record in the first week of residency and said, "You work like someone who has something to prove. Figure out who you're proving it to. It'll make you a better surgeon." I didn't answer her right away, but I thought about it for a long time. She became the mentor I had not known I needed. She was exacting and direct and occasionally terrifying in the operating room, and she was the first person in years who looked at me not with pity about what I had lost, but with genuine curiosity about what I was becoming. She didn't know the full story of my family for almost 2 years. When I finally told her, we were sitting in her office after a long shift, sharing terrible vending machine coffee, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The patients who survive the unsurvivable don't do it because the odds changed. They do it because something in them refuses to stop. That's you." She picked up her coffee cup. "Now stop being sentimental and go read up on the case in Bay 4. That was her version of love. I recognized it and accepted it completely. Gail and I got married in the spring of my 4th year of residency. We had been long distance for 2 years by that point, him still teaching in Tucson, me in Denver. We made it work the way you make anything work when you're both honest about what it costs and willing to pay it anyway. He applied for a teaching position in Denver during my 3rd year and got it. He moved with 3 boxes of books and a cast iron skillet he treated like a family heirloom. The proposal happened in the kitchen of our small Denver apartment on an unremarkable Wednesday evening. No grand gesture. No surprise. We had been talking about the future for months, and one night he just looked across the table and said, "I want to build all of it with you, Sam. The whole thing." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married on a Saturday afternoon in May, in the backyard of Dr. Marchetti's house, because she had offered with 0 ceremony and considerable organizational efficiency. 40 guests. Amina was my maid of honor. She cried from the moment the music started and did not stop until the reception dinner, which she insists she was not doing, but there is photographic evidence. Gail's father, a quiet, dignified man named Bernard Floyd, walked me down the aisle. He had asked carefully and gently whether I wanted him to, or whether I would prefer to walk alone. I told him I would very much like him to. He nodded and straightened his tie and did not make a production of it. But when we reached the end of that makeshift aisle and he placed my hand in Gail's, he squeezed my fingers once, just once, and looked at me with the kind of steadiness that a father is supposed to give. I had sent an invitation to Tucson. My parents' address. Formal, proper, the kind with an RSVP card enclosed. It came back the same way my letter had come back 3 years before. Unopened. The return address in my mother's careful handwriting. Amina found it in my bag 2 weeks before the wedding and asked me about it. I told her the whole story. She held the envelope for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You know what this means?" I said I did. She said, "It means you do this on your own terms. And it means we make it so beautiful that there is nothing to grieve. Only something to celebrate." She was right. And she delivered. After the ceremony, Dr. Marchetti pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. "A nomination," she said. "Don't open it until you're ready. You'll know when." I tucked it into my desk drawer at the hospital without asking questions. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has only ever told you the truth. I want to pause here, because what Callum had done was not a single lie told once in a moment of jealousy. It was a sustained, constructed campaign that required active maintenance for years. And the picture of it that gradually emerged piece by piece, through my Aunt Priya, through fragments and careful disclosures, was worse than I had ever fully allowed myself to imagine. At every family gathering over those 5 years, Callum performed the role of the devoted, heartbroken brother. "It's just too painful to talk about Samantha," he'd tell cousins. "Mom and Dad are finally finding some peace." He'd lower his voice. Let the silence fill in the rest. People stopped asking. But he didn't stop at silence. He told our grandmother that I was struggling with substance dependency. He told our Uncle Gavin that I had been asked to leave medical school for ethical violations. He told family friends that he had tried to reach me many times and that I refused all contact. That I was the one who had walked away. He flipped the entire story. "I've begged Samantha to come home," he reportedly said at a family birthday gathering 2 years in, voice perfectly calibrated to sound exhausted and sad. "She won't even respond. I think she resents us for something, but none of us know what we did." Meanwhile, I was 4 floors deep in a trauma bay in Denver, keeping someone's father alive. The genius of it, and I use that word with full disgust, was that Callum didn't need my parents to forget me. He needed them to believe I had chosen to leave. That way their silence felt justified. Their grief felt righteous. And he remained what he had always positioned himself to be. The loyal one. The one who stayed. The good child by default because the other child had been erased. He wasn't protecting them. He was protecting his place at the center of their world. And then there was the thing Gail told me 18 months ago, something he had known for over a year before he found the right moment to say it. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He set down his coffee mug the way he does when what comes next is serious. "There's something I've been sitting on," he said. "About 8 months after you made chief, someone contacted the hospital's credentialing office. Anonymous inquiry. They wanted to know if your surgical license had ever had any flags, any disciplinary actions, any questions about your training documentation." I went very still. "A colleague helped me trace it," he continued. "The inquiry originated from an IP address registered to a Tucson address. A cell phone provider in the 520 area code." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Denver was doing its usual indifferent morning. Traffic. Birds. Someone's dog barking 2 streets over. "He was looking for something to use," I said. "He was looking for anything," Gail confirmed. "Anything that could keep the story breathing." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "This isn't sibling rivalry anymore, Sam. This is something else entirely." He was right. Callum hadn't told a lie and moved on. He had built something structural. Load-bearing walls. Reinforced beams. He had spent 5 years making sure no part of it could fall without the whole thing coming down, because the whole thing coming down would mean confronting what he had actually done. I could have done something with that information. I could have called a lawyer. I could have reached out to my parents directly and laid out everything, the timeline, the evidence, the credentialing inquiry. I could have forced the conversation. But I didn't. Because as it turned out, life had already arranged for the conversation to happen. In the most public, most ironic, most structurally perfect way imaginable. And it was going to happen in my hospital. On my table. Under my hands. I just didn't know it yet. Wednesday night, February. I was the chief of trauma surgery at Crestfield Medical Center. I had held that title for 2 years. I had a house with a porch that caught the afternoon light beautifully. I had a husband who made me laugh every single day without trying. I had a golden retriever named Hippocrates, Hippo for short, who believed with his whole chest that he was allowed on the couch and had simply been waiting for the humans to accept this. It was a good life. A real one. Built piece by piece with my own hands and the hands of the people who had chosen me. But there is a specific kind of ache that does not fully resolve. It lives somewhere between your sternum and your spine, right in the space where family is supposed to be. I didn't wake up crying anymore. I didn't look at my phone hoping for a 520 area code. But every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time Gail's family gathered and I sat in the warmth of it, there was a flash, just a moment, where I felt the absence like a missing tooth your tongue can't stop finding. Aunt Priya still called every Sunday. She was my one thread back. I never asked about my parents directly, but I listened when she offered. Mom and Dad were healthy, still in the same house in South Tucson. Callum had recently gotten divorced and moved back to Phoenix. He was selling real estate now. The week before everything changed, Priya had called with a different quality in her voice. Careful, like someone choosing each word off a shelf before placing it down. "Samantha, there's something I've been meaning to tell you about Callum. Something has come to light, and I think you need to know before." My pager went off. Trauma activation. I told Priya I'd call her back. I never got the chance. Because what Priya was trying to tell me was already 40 minutes away, moving at highway speed toward an intersection it would not clear in time. And within the hour, it would be on my table. I just didn't know it yet. 2:51 a.m. The pager pulled me out of a dead sleep. Gale shifted beside me. Hippo lifted his enormous head from the foot of the bed and regarded me with patient concern. The screen glowed in the dark. Level 1 trauma. MVC, single male, 31. Blunt thoracic and abdominal trauma. Hemodynamically unstable. ETA 9 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes. On the road in 6. Denver at 3 a.m. has a particular quality of emptiness. The streets slick and orange under the lights. The mountains invisible in the dark, but present in the way mountains always are, whether you can see them or not. I ran the case in my head the way I always do on the drive-in. Mechanism of injury, probable organ involvement, surgical priorities. Motor vehicle collision, blunt thoracic and abdominal trauma, unstable vitals. Likely splenic involvement, possible diaphragmatic tear, cardiac contusion not ruled out. I'd managed this pattern dozens of times. My hands already knew what they would need to do. I badged through the ambulance bay entrance and walked directly to the trauma bay. My team was assembling. 2 senior residents, a trauma nurse named Denise who had worked nights at Crestfield for 11 years, anesthesia on standby. I reached for the intake tablet at the charge desk and swiped to the incoming patient chart. Patient Callum Ortiz. DOB, March 3, 1991. Emergency contact, Ronaldo Ortiz, father. I stopped walking. The noise of the department, the monitors, the intercom, the particular ambient urgency of a trauma floor at 3 a.m., it all pulled back. Like someone had turned a dial on reality slightly down. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I was not a surgeon. I was 26 years old sitting on a kitchen floor in an unfamiliar city, holding a phone that had just gone dead, 14 calls unanswered, a letter already sealed and already doomed. Dr. Ortiz. My charge nurse Gavin appeared at my shoulder. A careful voice. He had worked with me for 4 years and could read my silences the way you read weather. You good? I looked up. Set the tablet down. I'm fine. Prep Bay 1. Page Dr. Hendricks and get him on standby. I want him in the room. The ambulance siren was audible now through the bay doors. Getting closer. And somewhere behind that ambulance, I knew before I could see them, were 2 people I had not faced in 5 years. The ambulance doors opened, and the stretcher came fast. Callum was strapped down, unconscious, oxygen mask clouding and clearing with shallow breaths. There was blood on his shirt. One arm hung limp off the side rail. The paramedics were clipped and efficient, rattling off numbers. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate elevated, bilateral breath sounds diminished on the left, 2 large-bore IVs running, 1 unit of blood already in. Behind them, running, came my parents. My mother looked like time had moved faster for her than it should have. Her hair was thinner. Her face was drawn in a way I didn't recognize. She was in a coat thrown over pajamas, shoes mismatched, the left one a sneaker and the right one a flat. My father was in a flannel shirt and jeans, his face the color of old cement. His eyes were scanning everywhere at once. That's my son, he said loudly to no one specifically. Where are they taking him? I need the doctor in charge. I need to speak to whoever is running this. My charge nurse Gavin put both hands up. Sir, family waits in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already with him. The chief is handling this personally. Dad reached for Gavin's arm. Get me the chief. Now. Gavin glanced through the glass partition into the trauma bay. He looked at me, gowned and gloved, badge hanging at chest level. He read the name. His eyes went wide for a fraction of a second. Professional, measured, he composed himself immediately. I gave a small, single shake of my head. Not now. Gavin turned back to my father. Sir, the chief is preparing for surgery. You will be updated the moment there is information. Please, the waiting room is this way. My parents were guided down the hall. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was murmuring something under her breath, a prayer maybe, or just his name, repeated like it might hold him here by sheer repetition. My father turned back twice, looking through every window he passed. Just before he moved out of sight, I heard him say it, not to anyone in particular, just to the air. He's all we have. Please. He's all we have. He did not see me. I stood in the scrub room alone. I turned on the faucet and let the water run hot over my hands. I looked at myself in the stainless steel above the sink. The reflection was warped, the way those surfaces always distort, and for a moment I didn't recognize the face looking back at me. He's all we have. As if the other child had never drawn breath. I gave myself 30 seconds. That was all. I counted them. Then I paged Dr. Hendricks directly. I have a conflict of interest. The incoming patient is a biological family member. I'm disclosing it now and documenting it in the chart. If at any point my clinical judgment is in question, you take the lead. No discussion needed. Hendricks's voice was steady. Understood, Chief. I'm here. I told Gavin to note the disclosure in the nursing record. Everything documented. Everything by the book. Everything on paper. Then I pulled on fresh gloves, pushed through the hors d'oeuvres, and looked down at the table. My brother's face, slack and pale under the lights. Younger looking than I remembered. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. His hands, those hands I had watched hold a beer at family dinners while I sat invisible across the table, were still now. For 3 seconds, he wasn't the man who had dismantled my family with a phone call and a fabricated story. He was a body on my table. And that was exactly how I needed him to be. Scalpel. That's how long it took. Splenic laceration, grade 4. We packed it, assessed, determined the organ was not salvageable. Splenectomy. Diaphragmatic tear on the left side, significant but manageable. We repaired it in layers with the kind of focus that makes the rest of the world go silent. Thoracic hemorrhage from a torn intercostal vessel. Clamped, cauterized, controlled. His left lung had partially collapsed from the pressure of the bleed. We placed a chest tube and watched the lung re-expand in real time. I did not speak unless the work required it. Suction. Lap pad. Retract. Hold. Irrigate. My residents watched the way they always do during my cases, with the particular attention of people who know they are seeing something they will refer back to for years. I felt their focus sharpen when the diaphragm repair became technically complex, when the angles were difficult and the margin for error narrowed. I did not falter. There was no version of this where I faltered. At 6:44 a.m., I placed the final closing stitch. Callum's vitals were stable. Blood pressure normalized. Output was clear. He was alive. Dr. Hendricks, who had stood quietly in the corner of the room for the entire procedure, watching, present, ready, pulled down his mask. Samantha, he said quietly. Just my name. But in the way he said it, I understood everything he meant. Do you want me to go to the family? He asked. I peeled off my gloves, dropped them in the bin, washed my hands, the same automatic sequence I had performed 10,000 times before. No, I said. This one's mine. I looked at myself in the scrub room mirror one more time. Same face. Same badge. Same woman who had spent 5 years being erased by the person whose life she had just saved. I straightened my scrub top, checked my badge, took one breath, and walked toward the waiting room. The waiting room at Crestfield Medical Center at 6:50 in the morning has a specific quality of light. Fluorescent, flat, the kind that makes everyone look like they haven't slept, because they haven't. The chairs are gray. The television in the corner runs local news at a volume calibrated to be heard, but not listened to. There are usually 2 or 3 families scattered across the room at that hour, each one existing in their own private universe of worry. I pushed through the double doors still in my surgical scrubs. Mask pulled down around my neck. Scrub cap removed. Hair pulled back. My badge hanging at chest level, printed in clean block letters that anyone could read from 8 feet away. Dr. Samantha Ortiz Floyd, MD FACS. Chief of Trauma Surgery. My parents were in the center row. Dad was standing before I was fully through the doors. He always stood first. It was a reflex, the need to be the one who steps forward, who takes charge, who directs the information traffic. He had been doing it my entire life. Doctor, he said. How is he? Is Callum? He stopped. His eyes had dropped to my badge, then risen to my face, then dropped to the badge again. I watched the recognition move through him the way a tremor moves through the ground before the larger shake arrives. It started in his hands and climbed slowly to his jaw. Mom looked up half a second behind him. She had been sitting with her head bowed, hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes found my face, and her lips parted. No sound came out. Her right hand shot sideways and found my father's arm, fingers closing around the sleeve of his flannel with a force I could see from where I stood. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that contained 5 years. I spoke first. Calm. Clinical. The same voice I use in this room every time I walk through these doors, regardless of what is happening in my chest. Mr. and Mrs. Ortiz. I'm Dr. Ortiz Floyd, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your son Callum sustained a splenic laceration and a diaphragmatic tear in the accident. We also addressed a thoracic hemorrhage and a partially collapsed lung. Surgery was successful. He is stable and currently in the post-operative unit. You'll be able to see him within the next 2 hours. Mr. and Mrs. Not Mom. Not Dad. I watched that land. I watched it travel across both of their faces like weather. Behind me, through the glass partition, I could feel my team. Gavin at the nurse's station. Denise near the supply corridor. Dr. Hendricks somewhere in the background. They had been here long enough to read a room. They were reading this one. My mother moved first. She stood from the chair slowly, like someone navigating around pain they can't quite locate. Her arms came up. A sound broke through her chest before she could contain it. Samantha. Oh my God. Samantha. I stepped back. Half a step. Measured. Unmistakable. She froze. Her arms hung suspended in the air between us like a question that had not yet received its answer. Then, slowly, with a visible effort that seemed to cost her something real, they dropped back to her sides. My father's voice came out rough, like it had traveled over difficult ground to reach the surface. You're a surgeon. I am. You're the chief. I am. But Callum said. He stopped himself. Opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. He said you had been. Another stop. The machinery behind his eyes was working hard, trying to reconcile 5 years of certainty with the woman standing in front of him, wearing the evidence of everything he had been told was impossible. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. We thought you dropped out. We thought you were. She pressed her hand to her mouth. He told us you were struggling, that you couldn't cope, that you had. He told you I had dropped out. I kept my voice level. No shaking. No tears. I had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. In the car. In the shower. In the space between waking and sleeping where the mind goes to settle its unfinished accounts. I had never imagined it would happen under fluorescent lights in surgical scrubs with my team watching through glass. He told you I had a substance problem, that I was unreliable, that I had embarrassed the family, that I had cut off all contact. My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. None of it was true. Not one word of it. Through the glass behind me, I heard Denise set down her clipboard. I didn't turn around. My father tried to redirect. Old reflex, deep as bone. This isn't the time or the place, Samantha. Your brother is in recovery. I know. I just spent 3 hours and 50 minutes making sure he survives. I held his gaze. No anger in my voice. Just the clean, uncluttered weight of fact. So yes, Dad. I'm aware of where he is. He had nothing. For the first time in my memory, my father, a man who had driven long-haul freight routes through blizzards without complaint, who had an answer or a decree for every situation, who had never once in my lifetime been at a loss for a response, stood in front of me with nothing. The silence did the work I had never been able to do from 300 miles away with a phone that went straight to voicemail. My mother reached behind her for the back of a chair and held on. The letters, she whispered. You said you sent letters. 2 emails. With my leave of absence documentation attached. Dean Calder's direct number included. 1 handwritten letter mailed priority. I paused. You sent it back. Unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the envelope. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Her eyes closed. I called 14 times in 5 days. I asked Aunt Priya to speak to you. Dad told her to stay out of it. I wasn't accusing. I was reciting. Facts delivered in the same tone I used to deliver surgical findings. Because facts don't need volume to land. They just need to be true. Then Gavin appeared at the door behind me. He had no way of knowing the full story. Not yet. But he had hospital business that could not wait. Dr. Ortiz Floyd, I'm sorry to interrupt. The department chair saw the overnight trauma log. He asked me to pass along that the Surgical Excellence Committee sends their formal commendation for tonight's outcome. He also said to remind you that the Physician of the Year announcement is this Friday. He said it the way he said anything routine. He had no idea he had just placed a second charge in a room that was already in the process of detonating. My mother looked at me. Eyes swollen, pajama top visible under her coat, 1 mismatched shoe on each foot. Physician of the Year, she said. It's an internal recognition. I turned to Gavin. Thank you. I need to check post-op vitals. Excuse me. I walked toward the post-operative corridor. Measured steps. Spine straight. I did not look back. But I heard my mother's voice behind me. Small and broken and more honest than anything she had said to me in 5 years. "Ronaldo, what have we done?" And then something I had never heard in 34 years of being their daughter. My father. Silent. Because silence, for the very first time, was the only honest thing he had left. 4 hours later. Post-operative unit, room 4. Morning light coming through the blinds in pale horizontal stripes. The monitor beeping its steady, indifferent rhythm. The 4 poles standing at attention beside the bed. I came in for the standard post-operative assessment. Vitals, drainage output, incision check. Routine, except there was nothing routine about any of this, and we both knew it. Callum's eyes were open. Glassy from the anesthesia, struggling to focus, but open. He blinked at the ceiling. Blinked at the window. His gaze tracked sideways, slow and uncertain, until it found me. He squinted. "Read my badge." "Read it again." The color left his face the way color leaves a room when the lights go out. Not gradually. All at once. "Samantha." His voice was sandpaper and disbelief in equal measure. "Good morning, Callum. I'm your attending surgeon. You sustained a splenic laceration and a diaphragmatic tear in the accident, along with a thoracic hemorrhage and a partial lung collapse. All were successfully addressed in surgery. You're going to make a full recovery." He stared at me. "You're a doctor. I'm the chief of this department. Have been for 2 years. I watched it happen across his face. The same spectrum my father had gone through in the waiting room, but slower, filtered through morphine and what I can only describe as the dawning weight of reckoning. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked very much like fear. And then even now, even lying in a hospital bed with my sutures holding his diaphragm together, even within 4 in each arm and a chest tube recently removed, I watched the familiar flicker behind his eyes. Calculation. Even now he was looking for the angle, looking for the frame, looking for the version of this story that he could still shape to his advantage. "Samantha, listen. I can explain. It wasn't, I was worried about you. I genuinely thought. You don't need to explain anything to me right now." I nodded toward the glass door of his room, where 2 figures stood in the hallway. My parents. Faces destroyed. Eyes red and swollen. My mother's hand pressed flat against the glass. "You need to explain it to them." I updated his chart. Checked the drainage output. Left without another word. I did not stay to hear what happened next. But the post-operative unit at Crestfield is not soundproof. And neither is the truth when it finally runs out of places to hide. I learned what happened from Denise, who heard it from the post-op nurse who had been charting at the station directly outside Callum's room. If you've been following this story, you already have a sense of who my brother is. So you probably won't be surprised by what he did when my parents walked through that door. He cried. Not quiet tears. Heaving, shaking sobs that pulled at his incision and made the heart monitor spike, which brought the nurse in twice to check on him. He reached for my mother's hand before she was fully through the door. "Mom. Dad. I never wanted it to go this far. I was scared for her. I was trying to protect the family." My father stood at the foot of the bed. His voice was barely controlled. "Callum. Samantha is the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital. She performed your surgery tonight. She called your mother and me 14 times. She sent documentation. She asked Priya to intervene. A pause that held 5 years of wait. We blocked her number. We sent her letters back unopened. She's exaggerating. You know how she? Priya told us 2 years ago that Samantha was in residency." Dad's voice cracked on the last word, not from softness, but from the structural failure of everything he had believed. "You told us Priya was stirring up drama, that she didn't know the full story. She didn't understand the situation. What is the situation, Callum?" My mother's voice. Flat. Hollow. The voice of someone who has just walked into a room and found that the floor they trusted is not there. "The situation is that she left. She chose her friends over her family. She chose that life over us. We chose that," Dad said. "We chose to believe you. She didn't leave. We pushed her out." The monitor beeped. The 4 dripped. Callum stared at the ceiling. And then, because this is who he is, because this is the only move left in the playbook of someone who has run out of offense, he shifted. "Fine. She's a doctor. She did well. But you have to understand, I was in a difficult place. I was struggling. I made a mistake and it snowballed and I didn't know how to stop it. A 5-year mistake," Mom said. Silence. You told Grandma Rosa she was in rehab, Dad said quietly. I heard that from Cousin Elena last night. She called me on the way here because she saw the hospital admission on the family group, and she said, "Wait, isn't Samantha the one who?" Callum said nothing. She's been Physician of the Year nominee at this hospital, Dad continued. While we were telling the family she was homeless. More silence. That was when Aunt Priya arrived. Priya Ortiz walked into that post-operative unit at 10:15 in the morning looking like a woman who had been waiting 5 years for this specific conversation and had spent the time preparing for it. She was 63 years old, retired from 30 years as a paralegal, and she had a memory like a courthouse archive. She did not sit down when she entered the room. She did not hug anyone. She stood in the center of that space and looked at my brother in his hospital bed and my parents in their chairs, and she said, with the particular calm of someone who has rehearsed nothing because they don't need to, "I have been waiting a long time to say what I'm about to say, and I am not going to soften it for anyone in this room." She pulled out her phone. She had a folder. I found out afterward she had named it simply, Samantha. Evidence. Inside it, screenshots of every email I had sent my parents in those first desperate days. The PDF of my formal leave of absence from the University of Arizona College of Medicine, signed by Dean Calder, stamped with the registrar's seal, dated and time-stamped. My re-enrollment confirmation letter. A photograph from my residency graduation. Me in a cap and gown holding the diploma, squinting into the Colorado sun. Aunt Priya standing beside me, her hand on my arm. The only family member in the frame. She held the phone out. My mother took it with hands that were not entirely steady. And here, Priya said, swiping to a text thread. "This is a message Callum sent me 3 years ago." She read it aloud. "Don't tell Mom and Dad about Samantha's residency. It'll just reopen everything. They've finally found some peace. Let them have it." The room went completely still. Callum stared at the ceiling. "You told me," Priya said, looking directly at him, "that staying quiet was the kind thing. That it was for the family." She let a beat pass. "But this family has not had peace for 5 years. It's had a blackout. And you kept the lights off on purpose." She turned to my parents. "And the two of you," she said, and her voice was quieter now but no less precise, "you let this happen. Not because you didn't love Samantha, but because loving Callum was easier. He performed for you. She studied in her room. And you rewarded what you could see." Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue with. My mother was still holding Priya's phone. She was scrolling through my emails, reading them one by one with the focused, horrified attention of someone who is encountering a document that changes everything they thought they knew. Her lips moved slightly as she read. She stopped at the last one. The email I had sent the night before my residency graduation. I know what it says. I have read it so many times in my sent folder that I could recite it without looking. "Mom and Dad, I don't know if you'll ever see this. Tomorrow I graduate from surgical residency. I will be standing on a stage in Denver, Colorado, and I will be the only person on that stage without family in the audience. I have spent 5 years becoming someone I am genuinely proud of, and I have done it without you. I don't say that as an accusation. I say it because I need you to know that I survived. I am still here. I am still your daughter. I never stopped being your daughter. I just stopped being able to reach you." My mother did not cry. What happened was beyond crying. It was the sound of someone absorbing the full weight of an irreversible thing. The sound of a person meeting themselves clearly, possibly for the first time, and not being able to look away. My father had moved to the window. His back was to the room. His shoulders were moving. Priya told me later that in 63 years, in every hard thing their family had ever been through, she had never seen her older brother cry. Not once. Not at their parents' funerals. Not when his business nearly failed. Not ever. He cried now. Quietly, facing the parking lot, while the monitor beeped behind him and the morning light came through the blinds. Callum lay in his bed. He had stopped talking. The calculation was gone from his eyes. There was nothing left to perform, no audience left that would believe him, no frame left that would hold the story he had been telling. The version of himself he had maintained for 34 years was lying in pieces on the floor of a post-operative unit in Denver, and there was no amount of charm or reframing that was going to reassemble it. Priya's final word in that room, before she walked out, was addressed to my parents. "She sent the wedding invitation to your house. You sent it back." Nathan's father walked her down the aisle. A pause. "Think about what that means. Then decide what you want to do next. I came back that afternoon, end of shift. 23 hours since the pager had woken me. I found my parents still in the family waiting area. Of course I did. Where else would they go? Back to the house in Tucson where they had spent 5 years maintaining the fiction that they had only one child. Mom stood the moment I appeared in the doorway. Her face was swollen almost beyond recognition. She had no coat now. Someone had brought her coffee at some point. The cup was cold on the table beside her. Samantha. Baby. I am so sorry. I am so deeply, genuinely. I held up my hand. Gentle. Firm. I hear you. I believe you mean that. But I need you to understand something before we go any further. I kept my voice even. Not cold. Not angry. Anger would have been easier, actually. What I was feeling had burned through anger years ago and come out the other side as something cleaner. Sorry is a starting place. It is not a destination. It is not enough on its own, and it was never going to be enough on its own. I need you to understand that. Dad stood. He looked 5 years older than he had at 3 a.m. We want to make this right, Samantha. Whatever it takes. Then hear me clearly. I looked at both of them. I am not the girl who packed a bag and drove to medical school, hoping to make you proud. I am not the girl who called 14 times and sat on a kitchen floor when nobody answered. I am someone who built a whole life. A complete, real, full life without you in it. And if you want to be part of what comes next, it will be on my terms. Not Callum's. Not yours. Mine. My father opened his mouth. The old reflex. Then he closed it. And he nodded. Small. Devastated. Real. I looked toward Callum's room. When he's recovered, I said, he and I are going to have a conversation. A real one. Not today. Today he is my patient, and I don't mix the two. I picked up my bag. I'll be in touch. I left. Spine straight. Steps measured. I did not turn around. I was not closing the door. But I was the one who decided when it opened. How wide? And who walked through. 3 weeks later. Callum had been discharged. His incision was healing clean, the way good surgical work heals, steadily and without drama. The rest of him was a different matter entirely. I chose the location. A coffee shop in Aurora, halfway between his temporary apartment and our house. Neutral ground. Public enough that neither of us would perform. Private enough that we could be honest. Gale drove me. He sat at a corner table near the window with a stack of papers he was grading, pretending to be absorbed in freshman essays about the civil rights movement. He wasn't pretending, but he was also there. That's who Gale is. He shows up, and he doesn't make a production of it. Callum was already inside when I arrived. He was sitting with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from, staring at the table with the expression of a man who has had 3 weeks to think about everything and has not enjoyed a single minute of it. He had lost weight. Surgery and the particular exhaustion of being fully exposed will do that. The confidence he used to wear like a second skin was gone. For the first time in my memory, my older brother looked exactly his age. Maybe a little older. He looked up when I sat down. Opened his mouth. I shook my head. I'm not here to yell at you, I said. I'm not going to list every lie in chronological order. You know what you did? The only thing I want from this conversation is the one thing you have never once given me in your entire life. He waited. The truth. Just once. The real reason. The coffee shop moved around us. Someone's order was called. A child at the table near the door was arguing with her father about something involving a cookie. Outside, Aurora was doing its ordinary Wednesday morning with complete indifference to the conversation happening inside. Callum looked at the table for a long time. Long enough that I thought he might redirect, might soften, might find some version of honesty that still protected him at the center. Then he said it. Because you were going to be everything I wasn't. And I couldn't figure out how to exist in a family where that was true. I let that sit. The barista called a name. Someone laughed at the counter. A car passed outside. That's honest, I said finally. That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me. He looked up. His eyes were red. Not performing. Just red. I'm sorry, Samantha. I know what that's worth to you right now, which is probably very little, and I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. But I am. I know you are. I wrapped my hands around my own cup. But sorry doesn't give me back the years. Sorry doesn't put Dad at my wedding. Sorry doesn't unsend the returned letter that came back in Mom's handwriting like I was already dead to her. Sorry doesn't give me back the Sunday dinners or the phone calls or the ordinary, unremarkable presence of a family in my life while I was building something real from nothing. He looked away. His jaw was working. I know. There's something else, I said. I know about the credentialing inquiry. The anonymous contact to the hospital 2 years ago from a Tucson IP address. He went very still. You were looking for something to use. Anything that would keep the story alive. Keep me discredited. Keep yourself at the center. He didn't deny it. That, in itself, was something. Gail traced it, I said. He's thorough. Comes with the territory of being married to a civil rights attorney. A long silence. I didn't find anything, Callum said quietly. No, because there's nothing to find. I set down my cup. I want to tell you what happens next. And I need you to listen without interrupting, without deflecting, and without looking for the angle. He nodded. I am not cutting you out of my life permanently. I've thought about it. I understand why people do it. But that's not the choice I'm making. I leaned forward slightly. However, there are conditions. Non-negotiable ones. And if any of them are broken, we are done. Permanently and without further discussion. He was very still. First, you will tell the truth to every single person in this family you lied to. Every aunt. Every uncle. Every cousin who spent 5 years thinking I was in rehab or living on the street or too unstable to be spoken about at Thanksgiving. You will correct every story. Every single one. Okay. In writing. A group email to the whole family. All of them. Priya will confirm receipt. He swallowed. Okay. Second. You will not contact my parents on my behalf. You will not frame any part of this reconciliation. You will not insert yourself into whatever relationship I choose to rebuild with them or choose not to rebuild with them. That is entirely between us. Understood. Third, you go to therapy. Not because I'm requiring you to as a punishment. Because what you did didn't come from nowhere. It came from something that was already broken inside you long before you ever picked up that phone. And if you don't address that, you will do this to someone else. Maybe you already have. He flinched slightly at that last sentence. I didn't walk it back. I'll go, he said. Good. I stood. Picked up my bag. I'm not forgiving you today. I'm not sure when I will. Maybe I won't, not in the way the word usually means. But I believe in the possibility of people becoming different from what they were. You have my brother's surgical scar on your body now. Every time you see it, I want you to think about what it cost to get it. Not what it cost you. What it cost me. I left. Gale looked up from his papers as I passed. He didn't ask anything. He just stood, folded the papers under his arm, and walked out beside me. Outside, the February air was cold and clean. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it honestly. Like I said something true, I said. And like that's enough for today. He took my hand. We walked to the car. I met with my parents the following week. Gale drove me again. We sat at their kitchen table in the Denver hotel suite they had extended their stay in, because neither of them had been able to bring themselves to go back to Tucson yet. It was a round table. Small. Rented furniture, anonymous and neutral. Nothing like the kitchen table in South Tucson, where my father had read my medical school acceptance letter all those years ago. But something about the shape of it, for chairs, 2 of them occupied by people I had not sat across from in 5 years, felt like a strange echo of something I had once hoped for and stopped hoping for, and was now cautiously hoping for again. I did not do preamble. I'm open to rebuilding, I said. But I need you both to understand what that means and what it requires. My mother nodded immediately, with the desperate readiness of someone who has been waiting for permission to try. My father sat with his hands flat on the table. Listening. I need you to go to family counseling. Both of you together and both of you individually if the therapist recommends it. Not for my sake specifically. For yours. Because what happened was not just Callum's lie. Callum provided the match. But the house was already built to burn. I looked at my father. You raised us both to believe that one of us mattered more. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe you never noticed you were doing it. But that has to be examined. Not by me. By a professional who can help you understand it. Dad's jaw tightened. The old reflex. We don't really do that kind of thing, Samantha. In this family we've always just handled it internally. I finished for him. Yes. I know. And here we are. I held his gaze with complete steadiness. That's exactly why I'm asking. Mom placed her hand on his arm. Jerry, she said quietly. Please. He looked at her. Looked at me. Something behind his eyes moved. Not open, not yet, but shifted. Fine, he said. Low. Reluctant. Real. Thank you. I stood. Reached for my coat. Then turned back. One more thing. I looked at both of them. Gail's father walked me down the aisle. That happened. We cannot undo it. Bernard Floyd gave me away at my wedding because the people who were supposed to be there sent the invitation back unopened. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. If you want to know your future grandchildren, if you want to be present for what comes next in my life, you start now. Not with grand gestures. Not with expensive gifts or dramatic apologies. With consistency. With showing up when it's ordinary and unremarkable and there's nothing to perform. Apologies expire. Consistency doesn't. That is the only currency I'm accepting from this point forward. Dad stood. For a moment he just stood there, hands at his sides, looking at his daughter who had become a stranger, who had become a surgeon, who had become someone he would have to learn from the beginning. I understand, he said. 3 words. No decree. No redirect. No attempt to reframe or reclaim authority over the room. Just 3 words that, from my father in that moment, were everything. Callum sent the email on a Thursday night. Priya confirmed delivery to all 43 family addresses by Friday morning. She sent me a single text. It went out. All of them. I watched the read receipts come in. I didn't read the email until Saturday morning. Gail brought me coffee and set the laptop on the kitchen table, and then went to sit in the living room with Hippo. He knows when to give me space. After 5 years of marriage, he has learned the geography of my silences. The email was 4 paragraphs. No excuses woven between the facts. No flowery language softening the edges. No careful phrasing designed to make him look less culpable than he was. Just the facts, written in plain language, the way a person writes when they have finally run out of performances. He had lied about my leaving medical school. He had fabricated evidence. He had maintained the deception for 5 years through active, deliberate, ongoing effort. He had prevented our parents from receiving information that would have allowed them to make an informed decision about their relationship with me. He had told extended family members false and damaging things about my character and my circumstances. He had 2 years ago attempted to interfere with my professional standing by making an anonymous inquiry to my hospital's credentialing department. He ended it with 1 sentence. Samantha never abandoned this family. I made sure everyone believed she had. That is entirely my responsibility, and I am not going to ask anyone to minimize it. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop and sat with my hands around my coffee cup while Hippo wandered in from the living room and placed his enormous head in my lap and regarded me with the specific solemn sympathy that dogs seem to reserve for the moments when humans need it most. The responses came in over the following days. Uncle Gavin called Priya and did not speak for almost 30 seconds when she answered. Then he said, I told people that story. I repeated it. I told people at work. His voice was quiet and ashamed. How do I fix that? Priya told him the same thing I would have told him. You start by knowing the truth. Then you correct it wherever you passed it on. That's how. Cousin Elena sent me a direct message. We had not spoken in 4 years. I am so sorry, Samantha. I believed him. I should have called you myself. I knew your number. I just didn't. Our grandmother, Abuela Rosa, 87 years old, called me on a Sunday afternoon from Tucson. She had not said my name aloud in 3 years because Callum had told the family it upset my parents too much to hear. Her voice on the phone was thin but absolutely clear. I am 87 years old, she said, and in 87 years no one has ever lied to me so thoroughly through my own grandchild's mouth. Samantha, tell me everything. I want to hear your voice. I want to know who you became. I sat on the kitchen floor with Hippo beside me and told her. All of it. Medical school, residency, Gail, the wedding, the house, my work, the cases that stayed with me, the ones I was proud of. She listened for 45 minutes without interrupting except to ask questions. Real questions. The kind that show you someone is actually listening. When I finished, she said, forgive an old woman for going quiet when she should have been loud. There's nothing to forgive, Abuela. You were lied to. So was everyone. She made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument. The sound of someone who holds themselves to a standard that does not bend for circumstances. I should have called, she said. I knew your number too. Nobody organized a campaign against Callum. Nobody sent group messages declaring him finished. But the trust he had built over decades, the currency he had been spending carelessly for years, was gone. You could feel it in the silence that followed his email, in the responses that were brief or absent, in the invitations that quietly stopped including him, in the way people who had once leaned toward him at family gatherings now simply moved on without waiting for his version of events. No one punished him. They just stopped believing him. And for a man who had built his entire identity on being believed, on being the one people turned to, on being the center of every room he walked into, that was a consequence more total than anything I could have engineered. The gala was on a Friday evening in March at the Crestfield Medical Center's annual dinner, held at a hotel ballroom in downtown Denver. 200 people. Surgeons, residents, department heads, administrators, board members, donors. Crystal glasses catching the light. A string quartet playing something elegant in the corner that nobody was quite listening to. I wore a midnight blue dress that Amina had helped me choose over video call, which had involved her holding up 17 different options on her phone while Gail sat in the background providing unhelpful commentary that made both of us laugh until we couldn't breathe. Gail was at the front table looking like a man who had been born comfortable in a suit, which he absolutely had not been, and which he would tell you himself with no embarrassment whatsoever. Dr. Marchetti sat beside him, arms crossed, the particular small smile on her face that she reserves for moments she has been quietly engineering for longer than anyone realized. She had nominated me 2 years ago, the sealed envelope she had handed me at my wedding, and had said nothing about it since except, when you're ready. The MC stepped to the podium. This year's Physician of the Year is a surgeon whose clinical precision, composure under the most demanding circumstances, and unwavering commitment to her patients have become the standard against which excellence is measured in this institution. Please join me in recognizing Dr. Samantha Ortiz Floyd, Chief of Trauma Surgery. The surgical staff stood first. They had seen my work. They knew what it cost. I walked to the stage, the spotlight warm, the podium solid under my hands. I had written notes. I did not use them. 5 years ago, I said, I almost didn't finish. Not because I couldn't do the work. I could always do the work. But because I had lost the people I believed I needed in order to keep going. What I discovered, slowly and at considerable cost, is that the people you need are not always the ones you were born to. Sometimes they are the ones who look at who you actually are and choose you anyway. Choose you on an ordinary Tuesday. Choose you in the difficult years, not just the celebrated ones. I looked at Dr. Marchetti, at Gail, at Amina in the third row, already crying, which she would later deny, at my team seated behind her. And sometimes I said, the people you were born to find their way back. Late, imperfectly, through circumstances none of you would have chosen. But here, I looked toward the back of the ballroom. Last row, 2 seats. Priya had arranged them quietly, without fanfare, without asking me, because she knew me well enough to know I would have said it was too soon, and she was right that it wasn't. My parents. Mom in a dark red dress she had clearly bought for the occasion. Dad in a suit and a tie he was visibly uncomfortable in, sitting with his hands in his lap, looking at the stage with an expression I can only describe as a man watching something he almost destroyed and being fully, irreversibly aware of it. Mom's hand was over her mouth. Dad stood. Just stood. In the back row of a ballroom full of people who had no idea who he was, he stood up for his daughter. The applause filled the rest. Afterward, near the coat check, Gail found my father standing slightly apart from the crowd, holding a glass of water he wasn't drinking, looking at the framed photograph of the year's surgical highlights on the display wall. One of the photographs was from a case I had led 6 months ago. A pediatric trauma. The child had survived against considerable odds. Dad was looking at that photograph when Gail approached. They stood side by side for a moment without speaking. Then Dad said, I owe you an apology. I should have been the one at that wedding. I should have been the one to walk her in. That was mine to do, and I wasn't there, and you covered what I left empty, and He stopped. Cleared his throat. I'm sorry. That's not enough, but it's what I have. Gail is a history teacher and a patient man, and the son of Bernard Floyd, who taught him that dignity requires you to receive an apology with the same honesty you'd give one. He extended his hand. With respect, sir, he said, you should have been a lot of things. But we're standing here now. That counts for something. Dad shook his hand. Held it a beat longer than a handshake usually lasts. His eyes were red. He didn't let go right away. Mom found me near the door as the evening was ending. She didn't make a speech. She didn't list her regrets or outline her intentions. She just put her arms around me and held on. Forehead against my shoulder. Her hands pressed flat against my back. No words. Just the weight of her. Present. Finally, actually present. I let her. I didn't pull away. They found a therapist in Denver, a woman named Dr. Anita Voss, calm and direct, The kind of clinician who does not allow a question to be answered with a different question. Mom took to it with the intensity of someone who has been waiting for permission to put down a weight she has carried for decades. Dad struggled. He went. He sat. He answered in the fewest words possible and waited to see if that would be sufficient. Dr. Voss, from what Priya reported, was not a woman who accepted insufficient. She told him, gently and without drama, that his certainty had been the architecture of the problem, not Callum's lie alone. Dad's absolute refusal to revisit a decision once made, his need to be the final authority in every room, his lifelong habit of accepting the version of events that required the least disruption to his existing beliefs. Callum had known exactly which door to knock on, and Dad had opened it and never looked through the frame. He didn't argue with her. That was the first sign. 3 weeks into counseling, Mom wrote me a letter, handwritten, sent to our house in Denver, the irony of which was not lost on either of us. I read it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. Hippo was asleep on my feet. Gail was in the next room. The house was quiet in the way it gets quiet when everything important is happening internally. I failed you, she wrote. Not just when I believed your brother. Long before that. Every time I saw you standing in the doorway of a room we were all in and told myself you were fine because examining whether you were fine would have required something from me I didn't know how to give. Every time I let your father's certainty substitute for my own judgment. Every time Monica got the call and you got the silence. I knew somewhere I knew that we were not seeing you equally. I chose not to look directly at that knowing because looking at it would have required me to act, and I was afraid of what acting would cost. I'm not asking you to forgive that today. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word for something this large. But I want you to know that I see it now. All of it. Clearly. Without the filter your brother provided. And what I see breaks my heart in a way I think it should have broken much sooner. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I went to the drawer where I keep the things that matter most. Sarah's card. My own returned letters. The wedding invitation that came back unopened. Priya's photograph from my graduation. I placed my mother's letter inside. Same drawer. Different side. Not the same as the others. But kept. Because it was real. And real is what I am building toward. Callum and I have met for coffee 3 times since the conversation in Aurora. The first meeting was short and uncomfortable in the way that honest things often are when honesty is new. He didn't deflect. He didn't perform. But he also didn't quite know how to exist in a conversation without those tools. And the silence between sentences was long and slightly awkward, and strangely more trustworthy than anything smooth would have been. The second meeting he told me he had started therapy. He said it the way someone says something they're not sure will be received well, carefully, watching for my reaction. I told him I was glad. I meant it. The third meeting, he said something I had not expected. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I know what that would look like, or whether I deserve to find out. But I want you to know that I think about it every day. What I did. What it cost you. I think about the 14 calls. I think about the letter you sent that came back. He paused. I think about the fact that you saved my life. With the hands I spent 5 years trying to discredit. I took a sip of my coffee. I know, I said. How do you carry that? He asked. Knowing what I tried to do and then doing that anyway? I thought about it honestly before I answered. Because the oath isn't conditional, I said. It doesn't say I will care for patients unless they have wronged me. It says I will care for patients. And when you were on that table, you weren't my brother who lied. You were a person who was going to die if the best surgeon in the building didn't operate. I set down my cup. I chose the oath over the anger. That's not nobility. That's just who I decided to be a long time ago when I had no one watching and nothing to gain from it. He nodded slowly. Show me, I said. Not today. Over time. With consistency. With the unglamorous, unremarkable work of being a different person on ordinary days when there's nothing at stake and no one is watching. He said he would try. I don't know yet whether I believe him. I know the difference between his performances and his stillness, but I'm still learning which version of him is underneath both. Maybe he's still learning that too. Maybe that's what the therapy is for. He carries my surgical scar on his body. Left upper abdomen, fading from pink to white as the months pass. Every time he catches his reflection, every time he gets dressed, he sees the mark left by the sister he spent 5 years trying to erase. The sister who, when the moment arrived, held the scalpel steady and chose the person over the pain. I carry what he did in my memory. 5 years of silence. 14 unanswered calls. A letter in my mother's handwriting returned, as though I had already ceased to exist. We are even in the strangest and most painful way two siblings can be even. And maybe with enough real time and enough honest effort and enough of the ordinary, unglamorous consistency that actual change requires, we will find our way to something that is not even. Something new. Something that doesn't have a name yet, because it hasn't been built yet. I'm willing to find out. That's all I can offer right now. But it's more than I had before. And more is enough to begin. First Sunday in April. Denver doing what Denver does in early spring, uncertain weather, the mountains visible and snow-capped. The streets below them insistently trying to believe it's warmer than it is. I'm making breakfast. Gail is grinding coffee beans and narrating the process for Hippo, who is listening with the earnest attention of a dog who genuinely believes he might be included. The kitchen smells like coffee and butter and the particular warmth of a morning that has nowhere to be. The doorbell rings at 9:15. I wipe my hands on the dish towel and open the front door. My parents, standing on the porch in their coats. Dad is holding a paper bag from the bakery 3 blocks away, the one Priya had told them about. Mom is holding a small pot of flowers, purple and yellow, because it's spring and she said she wanted to bring something living. Hi, Mom says. The word lands somewhere between a greeting and a prayer. Come in, I say. Coffee's almost ready. Dad steps inside and looks around the kitchen the way someone looks at a place they've heard described many times and are finally seeing. The house he has never been in. The life he almost never knew existed. The evidence of a daughter who built something real and whole and genuinely good without anyone from Tucson in the frame. He clears his throat. Can I do anything? I look at him. My father, 64 years old, standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning holding a bakery bag and asking permission to be useful. Asking in a voice that doesn't assume the answer is yes. You can set the table, I say. He nods. I point to the cabinet. He opens it, takes out 4 plates, counts them once, looks at me briefly as if confirming, then sets them down. One by one. Carefully. Like he's paying attention. Gail hands him a coffee without ceremony. Dad takes it with both hands and says thank you in a way that means more than the words. Mom hugs me at the stove. Not a dramatic hug. Not a hug that's trying to compress 5 years of absence into 30 seconds. Just her arms around me, her forehead briefly against my shoulder. No words required. I let my hand rest on her back for a moment. Hippo, sensing the emotional tenor of the room and making a unilateral decision about his role in it, wanders over and places his head against my father's knee. Dad looks down at him. Then he does something I don't expect. He reaches down and scratches behind Hippo's ears, slowly, carefully, like he's learning the right way. Hippo's tail thumps against the floor. Outside, the snow that's been threatening all morning finally begins to fall. Light and lazy, the kind that doesn't stick but makes the whole world look briefly like it's being offered something gentle. The French toast sizzles. The coffee maker hisses. For plates on the table. It's not the childhood I deserved. It's not the version of this story where everything arrives on time and no one gets lost along the way, and the family you were born into sees you clearly from the beginning. That version doesn't exist. Not for me. Maybe not for anyone. But this is real. And real, I have learned at considerable cost and with genuine gratitude, is more than enough to begin with. My name is Dr. Samantha Ortiz Floyd. I am 34 years old. I am the chief of trauma surgery at Crestfield Medical Center. I have a husband who makes me laugh on ordinary Tuesdays. I have a dog who believes wholeheartedly in the goodness of people and communicates this through enthusiastic physical contact. I have a mentor who changed the direction of my life by refusing to let me be less than I was capable of. I have a best friend who sat on a kitchen floor with me when the world went quiet and said, "Get up, we have work to do." I have an aunt who kept a folder labeled with my name for 5 years because she believed the truth would eventually need evidence. And I have, slowly and carefully and on my own terms, let myself begin to be someone's daughter again. For plates on the table. It's a start. If you're still here, thank you. I mean that in a way that goes beyond this screen. If this story found you, I don't think it was an accident. Maybe you're the one who was erased. The one who called 14 times and stopped at 15 because you finally understood that the door wasn't stuck. It was locked from the inside. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. Your absence from their story does not determine your presence in your own. Build the life. Build it fully and without waiting for permission from the people who should have been cheering from the beginning. Let them find a door that you control. Maybe you're the one who did the silencing. Not dramatically. Not with forged screenshots and deliberate campaigns, but quietly, passively, through the choices you made about whose version to believe and whose calls to return and whose achievements warranted the refrigerator magnet. If that's you, I want you to hear this too. It is not too late to look clearly at what you did. It is not too late to sit down with someone and examine why. The truth has a patient way of finding its moment. It is always better to walk toward it than to wait for it to arrive. And maybe you're the one in the middle. The parent. The sibling. The person who believed the easier story because the harder one required something you didn't know how to give. If that's you, the door is still there. But you don't get to decide when it opens. The person on the other side of it does. Here is what I know to be true after 34 years and 5 of the hardest ones. The truth doesn't expire. It doesn't tire. It doesn't need you to defend it or perform it or carry it loudly through every room. It just waits, with the particular patience of something that knows it is the only real thing in the space. You can lie for 5 years. You can forge and manipulate and build architecture around a version of events that serves you. And it will hold. Until it doesn't. Until the night a pager goes off at 3 a.m. and life arranges for the truth to walk into the room wearing a white coat and a badge and the proof of everything you said was impossible. I didn't get revenge. I didn't need revenge. I became someone who had moved so far past the need for it that revenge would have felt like going backward. And that, it turns out, was the most complete response available to me. Not a plan. Not a scheme. Just a life. Lived fully. On my own terms. With the people who chose me. And if you are waiting the way I waited, for the people who were supposed to see you to finally turn around and look, I want to leave you with this. Stop waiting for them to see you. See yourself first. Build the life you deserve with the people who show up, who choose you on ordinary Tuesdays, who drive 3 hours with slightly oversized flowers and stand in the front row without being asked. And when the others finally turn around, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide. You decide who walks through. That's not revenge. That's not bitterness. That's not even strength, exactly. That's just what it looks like when a person finally, fully, belongs to themselves. If this story stayed with you, if it found something real in you that you've been carrying quietly, leave me a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me where you are right now and what time it is there. Tell me if you have your own version of 14 calls and a letter that came back. I want to know. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. Because there are more. There are always more. I'll see you next time.